Today's podcast just might change the way that you look at your radio station website as we talk with Jacobs Media's digital dot connector, Seth Resler.
This is Better Radio Websites, the podcast for radio professionals who want to see their website generate more traffic and revenue. Each week, your host, Jim Sherwood, and his special guests give you time-tested tips and secret tricks to ensure your radio station dominates digital in your market. Here we go.
Hi, it's Jim, and welcome to Better Radio Websites, the podcast that wants to help you get more visitors and the most revenue from your radio station website. And today we have a very special guest, somebody that I have been following for close to 9 years now through his personal blog. Seth Resler is a 25-year broadcasting and podcast veteran. He's worked on air and in programming in several major markets across the country before jumping into online marketing. He's now the digital strategist for Jacobs Media, working with radio stations across the country, helping them design and implement action plans that combine websites, social media, email marketing, search engine optimization, content marketing, lead generation, and other online tools. It's all online. Seth, thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Oh, thank you for having me here. And look, I'm really glad that there's a podcast dedicated to this topic. I mean, it's pretty niche topic, but it's pretty important. So thank you for doing it.
Yeah, it really is. And, I was actually surprised that when I started doing this podcast that you didn't beat me to the punch because you're a big podcasting guy.
I think I already had 3. So I've had 7 or 8 over the years, and I've also produced podcasts for other people. Mm-hmm. So, there's a lot.
Yeah,
there's only so much content you can put out.
And it seems like over the years, you and I have our paths have kind of taken the same kind of trajectory. We started out on air, done some programming, all this other stuff, and then we kind of migrated to online marketing and everything online. How did that kind of process work for you?
So I started in radio. I mean, I remember wanting to be in radio from a very early age and listening. I grew up in the Bay Area. Kelly and Klein was the top 40 morning show on KWSS. It was my first favorite show. Mm-hmm. I remember discovering Live 105 in San Francisco. And the first time I ever set foot in a radio station, I was working for my high school newspaper. And really, it was an excuse to go up and interview Alex Bennett of Live 105, who I listened to every morning. Yep. And it was amazing because he had a live studio audience and comics would stop by. So Penn Jillette was actually on the show that morning. And I remember at one point using the restroom and standing at the urinal, and Penn Jillette, stood and at the urinal next to me. And I remember I actually said out loud, I can't believe I'm peeing next to Penn Jillette. And he just started laughing. But that was my first celebrity encounter. And the visual must be even more funny because I'm only 5'4" and he is a big dude.
Yeah, he's like 10 feet tall.
So that was when I fell in love with radio, and I went to Brown University, and part of the reason I chose it was because it had a fantastic radio station associated with it, WBRU, and I worked there. And I majored in political science, but really I majored in radio. That was where I spent all my time, and did what radio broadcasters do. There seem to be 2 types. Either you stay in the same market and you move from station to station and format to format within a market. I was the other type. I stayed in the same format, alternative rock, and moved from city to city to city. So, sure. And I've been fortunate. I've had the luxury of working at some great radio stations, The Point in St. Louis, The End in Seattle, WBCN in Boston, among others. So. Yeah, K-Rock in New York. I was on air there for a little while too.
Sure. So how'd you make that move to being on air to just fully digital now? Fully digital.
Oh,
you're the top. To me, you're the top digital guy. If there is a top digital guy out there, you're there because Jacobs Media, that's probably the largest consultant, right? And then you're the digital guy there.
Well, thank you. I did what most radio people do, which is that I got fired. I found myself out of work, and look, the move up for me was to oversee 5 stations and play Nickelback on all of them, and that was not particularly appealing to me at that point in my life. And so I went into Silicon Valley, and which is where I grew up, and learned digital marketing. And it was a real career shift for me. I did not expect at that point to come back to radio. And I learned a lot of things. I mean, radio broadcasters have a habit of asking, what are other radio stations doing? And that is my least favorite question, because we as an industry look internally way too often, and we don't look at what other industries are doing. And when I left radio, it was amazing. I mean, it was really eye-opening, all the things that other industries were doing that were just not common practice. One of my favorite places to talk about is actually on the sales side, lead generation and all that kind of stuff. Whereas, most radio stations are still prospecting like we did back in the 1970s, where, somebody advertised in the newspaper, we better call them.
Right.
There's better ways to do it now.
Yeah.
So I learned a whole lot. I bounced around and learned digital marketing. I never found anything that I particularly liked doing, but I learned a lot doing it. And the way I got back into radio is I'll never forget. Jason Jackson, who was a friend of mine, was named the program director of Live 105 in San Francisco, which is, again, one of my favorite stations that I grew up listening to.
Yeah.
And when he first arrived, we were walking around. We went and had lunch. We were walking around the Stanford campus. And Jason said to me, "I'm looking for a morning show." And I said to him, "Well, if I needed a morning show, here's what I would do." And I started talking about, I do this with email, and I do this on social media, and I do this with a podcast. And, and it wasn't the normal, hey, I'd have the intern be a stunt guy and go,
right.
do this. It was all this digital stuff. And Jason just looked at me and he goes, nobody in the radio industry knows what you're talking about, right? And I didn't realize that. And he said, you should reach out to Joel Denver over at All Access, and you should ask him if you can write a column. And I did. And Joel said yes, and he was all about it. And so I started writing a column for Joel Denver, which was just taking all the things I had learned outside of radio about digital and talking about how radio could apply them. And after doing that for a year, I had been playing around with podcasting, and I said to Joel, hey, what do you think if I come down to the Worldwide Radio Summit and record a bunch of interviews and we put it out as a podcast? And at that point, I don't know that Joel knew what a podcast was, but he was like, sure, come on down. And I did. And I interviewed a bunch of people for that first season. Jeff Samuelian from Emis. I interviewed Bubba the Love Sponge. But one of the people I interviewed was Fred Jacobs of Jacobs Media. And I had been a Jacobs Media client over the years at some of my radio stations, but I had never actually dealt with Fred directly. And so that was the first time I met Fred and Paul Jacobs. And we had a great conversation and didn't think much of it. And then Lori Lewis, who was my predecessor, who was fantastic, but she left Jacobs Media to go to Cumulus. And so Fred called me up, and that was how I wound up here. And that's what I do. I'm a translator. I speak internet and I speak radio, and I explain SEO to people who are used to talking about TSL.
Wow. What a journey that is. And a great story too. I mean, how you met them and how that came to be.
I like to tell people that I interviewed Fred to get the job.
There you go. That's perfect. So, so what's the process now when you guys are talking to radio stations and they say, and this is Seth Resler, our digital dot connector, and he's going to help you with our radio station. How does that conversation start with a radio station who either they have an existing website or they're going to start brand new with one, and they, so far their radio station website has just been a listen live link, and that's it.
Yeah.
And so how does that conversation go?
So they gave me the title digital dot connector. And there's been the occasional second thought because we have to explain it. But the concept was this. When I started in radio 25 years ago, I needed to know how to use the CD players and the cart machines, and maybe selector. And that was it. And nowadays, radio broadcasters are being asked to know how to use competently so many different tools. And it's everything from Facebook and Twitter to TikTok to Google Analytics to podcasts to blogs to you name it. And they're expected to be proficient in all of this, to say nothing of the fact that, there's fewer people in every building than there used to be. So everybody's got to take on multiple roles. So really what my job is to make sense of all these different pieces, figure out how to put them all together in a way that ultimately affects the bottom line, and come up with a strategy, all these different digital dots, these different digital tools. And connect them. And I don't have any radio stations that I've ever talked to who told me we have too many staff and not enough things for them to do.
Right.
Too much budget. We don't know how to spend it all. Like everybody's working with limited resources.
Sure.
So part of it is figuring out, if you can't do everything, what do you need to focus on, and what's the process. And it's okay if you're not doing Snapchat at the moment. It's not the end of the world. And so that's what a lot of it is just starting there and figuring out that strategy. And where it comes to websites is, frankly, that's usually the first thing. Most radio stations like to focus a lot on social media because it's kind of the sexy part of the internet.
And it's easy.
And it's easy, and everybody can kind of do it and wants to learn it and has learned it on their own. And so much of it starts with the website and the email newsletter. I mean, since the pandemic started, email 101 has been a lot of my focus with stations, because all of a sudden they realized how important it was to be able to communicate with those listeners, especially if there's something that is preventing them from getting in their car and going to work every day. So, yeah, I mean, it really is. And it's these are not the sexy components, but they're the workhorses. And you need to have these in place first, and everything else drives back to them.
Yeah, exactly. And then that's what we've been preaching forever, that everything out there that, the properties that you rent goes,
Yes.
always point back to the properties you own.
Yeah, and what we mean by that analogy, something that we say a lot is, you're renting social media, right? Meaning that, yes, you have a space there, but if the landlord, Mark Zuckerberg, decides to raise the rent, you've got to pay it. And we saw this in particular when he was getting, called in front of Congress, and so they were making algorithm changes, and all of a sudden we'd see stations tell us, well, we saw a 50% drop off in our engagement with our Facebook page. What do we do? And the answer is, you're renting. There's not much you can do there.
That's
Like,
right.
you're subject to whatever, as opposed to your website, which you own, as opposed to your email database, which you own. The way I think of social media and its relationship to a website is very similar to the way I think of if you own a radio station and you put a billboard by the highway, right? The reason you want to be by the highway is because lots of people are on the highway, which is the exact same reason you want to be on social media. Lots of people are on social media. But the point of the billboard is not to hope that people drive by the billboard and go, oh, that's a cool billboard, right? The point is that you hope they see the billboard and tune into the radio station.
Right.
Well, by the same token, you hope that people see your stuff on social media and they don't just like it or comment on it and say, that's great. You hope that they click back and come to your website, which is the asset that you own. And once they're on the website, it's there that they can stream the station. It's there that you can capture their email address, or they can enter a contest, or they can click on a link that says advertise with us. That those are the things that you ultimately want to do. And just like you wouldn't go on, I see this all the time with radio stations where, it's fine to have links to your social media accounts, but I see that big widget that, like, here's all the things we just posted to Facebook. And, to me, I went through all that work to get them off of Facebook to my website. The last thing I want to do is send them back. That's like going on your radio station and saying, hey, check out the great billboard we put on.
That's right.
Why would you do that? That's not the point.
Yeah,
So,
exactly.
yeah.
I totally agree. And so what do you think now, with the station website, what is the biggest thing that should be on a station website? I mean, what should radio stations be focused on for their radio station website? Is there one particular thing?
Well, I mean, we run a lot of what are called usability tests, and I think you've talked about them on the podcast before. A usability test is a test where we get 3 people. I usually get them off of Craigslist. I prefer them to be people who are not familiar with the radio station, because I don't want them bringing information that they have from the airwaves. I want them to respond to the website. And one at a time, we sit them in front of the computer and we pull up the website and we ask them to do basic things and see how they react and to think out loud. So we might say, hey, you won a prize, you need to go pick it up. Can you find the address of the radio station? And if they find it easy, great, that's working. And if they don't find it, we've got a problem.
Sure.
And you do 3, because in particular, if one person has a problem, it might be the one person. If 2 people have a problem, it's the website. And these are not down to the decimal point exact science studies. These are hit yourself upside the head and go, oh, I can't believe we didn't think of that.
Right.
So we'll run these website tests, and the first thing I do when we pull up a radio station's website is I will ask, what does this organization do? You would think that that would be a very simple question.
Sure.
I would say 95% of the websites that I've ever tested, and I've tested dozens, don't do particularly well on that question. And that includes websites that I have built knowing that that was going to be the first question that I'd ask.
So,
I remember.
did they not think it was a radio station?
Oh, I had one test where we tested a website, and it took the tester 10 minutes to figure out that they were looking at a website.
A radio station website.
A radio station website. And look, the first place people are going to look for that information is they're going to look in the top left corner. Mm-hmm. And if they see, 108.8 FM WKRP, right, they're going to know it's a radio station. But if it just says The Hawk or The Mountain or, The Flower or whatever the name of your radio station is, like, people don't know. And then most radio station websites have a feature that I am vehemently opposed to, which is a slider mm-hmm. on the homepage, which has a rotating list of slides.
Yes.
And sliders are great for settling fights within the building. Okay, because what happens is you get the staff together, and the salesperson wants something for their client, and the music director wants this little baby band that's playing at the club this weekend, sure. And the promotions department wants their street team stop. Yeah. And so you just go, you're like Oprah, you're like, you get a slide, and you get a slide, and you get a slide, and the fights are settled.
Right.
But from the audience member's point of view, they have no idea. This mm-hmm. website's about Dunkin' Donuts, or yeah. whatever shows up on the, and so I am a big believer that you should pull that, and you should use an image similar to what you would actually use on a billboard by the highway. That if you have core artists, they need to be right there on the homepage. If you play Beyonce and Drake, and you want people to think of Beyonce and Drake when they, think of your radio station, those need to be on the homepage. So to me, a website is a great queue building tool. Sure. Particularly for radio stations who don't have big marketing budgets. I mean, this is your, people could land here who are not familiar with your radio station, and what do you want them to know within the first 3 seconds of looking at your radio station? So we'll ask them, what does this organization do? Hopefully they'll say it's a radio station. We'll ask, if you tuned into this radio station, what would you expect to hear? Hopefully they'll say, this type of music, and sometimes even that can be confusing. Oh, I'd hear rock music. Well, is that the Beatles or Five Finger Death Punch? There's a lot between there.
Yeah,
so,
yeah.
One of the questions we'll ask that really trips people up is, where is this station? And people don't think to put that on their website, because when we go on air, we don't have to say that a lot. I mean, you have the legal ID and that's it, but everybody you're talking to is in the same geographic region as you. Well, that's not how the web works. I mean, people could be coming from anywhere. So, and as a guy who looks at a lot of station websites, it's really frustrating when I'm sitting there going, I can't figure out where the station is.
Right.
Looking at the website. So we'll ask things like that. We will go through the main menu, mm-hmm. and we will say, don't click on anything, but tell us what you would expect to see if you did click on it. And we will find that there are certain words that work really, really well, and there are certain words that can be confusing. I particularly like this. So something like events or contests, like people click that, you know what you're going to get. I see the word on air a lot in a website menu, and on air is everything you do. I mean, on air is your commercials, it's your music. Most stations, what they really mean is DJs or shows. Mm-hmm. And when they say on air, there is always a catch-all item in the menu. It's usually something like connect.
Yes.
And look, I get it. We have it on Jacobs Media. We call it resources. And what that really means is, here's where we shoved everything that we couldn't figure out where else to put it. You sort of, it's an art. It's not a science.
Right.
You do the best you can, but you will see things like that. Within the menu, I'm amazed at how many stations don't have advertise. Mm-hmm. As right there. I would argue that the Advertise With Us page is the most valuable page on your website. I don't know why you would only put a link in the footer and make people go searching for it, or bury it in a submenu. I would put it right up front and center. If somebody wants to advertise, They want to give you money, man. Make it
Yeah.
easy as possible.
Exactly. Because
Um,
because if they like what they hear, they're obviously there to the website, or they found it in a search engine.
yep.
I always tell folks a new advertiser has come to town and they want to advertise somewhere about their brand new business that they're bringing to town. Is your website going to be found whenever they do a search for advertise within this city?
Yeah.
And then so your advertise with us page needs to be formulated with those kind of keywords associated with it so they can find it.
Yeah. And let's talk about the Advertise with Us page too, because that's one where what a lot of radio station websites do is it's just, hey, here's the phone number and an email address, call us. Or maybe there's a paragraph about how great the radio station is. And that's it. And that page can be written to be a lot more compelling. I actually just went through this with a client where we took a page. And so there's a little bit of a formula to it. I like to write an Advertise with Us page, even though it's called, advertise. You think it's about the radio station. You got to make it about the person who's reading, right? The potential advertiser. So the first question is, what is the problem they have, and describe that problem. In a sentence or two, in a paragraph. Hey, we know it's really hard to reach people, and you're trying to grow your business and get more foot traffic through your establishment or whatever. I would probably have crafted this, when we were in the height of the pandemic. I would have rewritten it specifically for the pandemic because we know that there are problems. Hey, we know that you're having a hard time, hiring people or whatever. But make that first paragraph about the potential advertiser. What is the problem they have? Describe the problem. Make it clear that you relate to them. The second paragraph is about how you solve the problem. Hey, we can help get word out about your business. Here's how we do it. Da, 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 da. And then you can get into, here's how great the radio station is, and here's what we do. Use photos of your events, of your DJs. You've got personalities, that other companies don't have. Leverage them. Show that photo of your DJ on stage at the concert in front of thousands of people, making stage announcements. Absolutely put that there. Put logos of the companies that you worked with as clients. That's proof that you work with existing clients. Put links to case studies if you've got them, but really make that a compelling page. I think there's a lot more that people can do with that Advertise with Us page that stations just don't do.
Yeah, exactly. What do you think the biggest hurdle for radio stations are? You mentioned kind of jokingly that stations don't have a lot of people. The stations that you deal with, well, Seth, we just can't get on board with this because this.
The hardest part these days is the human systems, right? I think 10, 15 years ago, the technology was tricky. It was hard to get it to do what you wanted it to do. At this point, the technology is pretty easy. I mean, building a website in WordPress is not hard. I'm not a coder at all. I don't know a line of code, and I've built a dozen websites in WordPress. Things like MailChimp and that other stuff. This stuff is not hard. What's hard is getting the human beings within the station to operate all the tools and the machinery and the things that they need to do well. And the system, especially because so much of it is content and pushing content out. And that can be tough. A lot of people got into radio because they wanted to talk, not because they wanted to write.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Things like that. And so, I think especially a couple of years ago, as when we said content, we mostly meant blogging,
Right.
for things in finding the search engine. That was tough. I think as content has expanded and it's become a lot more easier to create video or podcasts or other things, there are some things that are more within the staff's skill sets and that they feel more comfortable doing,
Sure.
Which I think is fortunate. But really, it's those human processes and figuring out, okay, we got all the tools, but how do we get everybody to run it? How do we train everybody? How do we make sure that they know what they're doing? How do we get their buy-in to make sure that they don't feel like this is just one extra thing they're being asked to do, but they see that it actually makes a difference? All that sort of stuff.
Sure. Exactly. Well, Seth, I mean, look, we could talk for hours and hours on this, and I'd love to have you back on some more podcasts in the future so we can go into, each of these things that we'd love to talk about here, because I mean, seriously, you and I, about these radio station websites. I mean, this could be an all-day thing, but I
Oh,
want to try to keep
absolutely.
these podcasts very short. And
Yeah, no, I understand. I mean, I'd love to come back anytime. I mean, this is what I do. This is what I talk to people about. I enjoy this. I think I think there's a lot of opportunity for radio. And I was looking at a Facebook thread and radio broadcasters group the other day, and somebody in there started this thread where they said, I'm just really getting disillusioned about radio and where the industry's going, and I just don't have the passion and the energy that I had for it, when I started 15 or 20 years ago. And a lot of other people chimed in and said, yeah, I feel the same way, and I understand that. I think one of the things to keep in mind is that if you are an audio content creator, or even broader than that, if you are a content creator, it has never been a better time than it is right now.
yeah,
Because there are so many tools out there. There's so many ways to be creative. They're accessible. They're inexpensive. I mean, there's just a lot that you can do. And I do find that there are two types of on-air personalities. There are those who got into this because they want to be a star, but they just want to be a radio star. And then there are guys who want to be a star and they understand that it's a multimedia star. And, they look at Ryan Seacrest, who's also on television and hosting this and hosting that, and go, that's what I want to be. And, radio's part of that, but radio's not all of that. Well, that's what Instagram and TikTok and blogs and webinars and podcasts and all this other stuff is. And so if you can figure out ways to be creative and tap into all that stuff, I mean, connecting it to the bottom line is not easy, but it's an exciting time to be a content
oh
creator.
yeah, absolutely. Because I mean, if you think about it, some of the brand new artists that are coming on the scene right now have been discovered on TikTok.
Yeah.
So, I mean, so why can't a radio station jump on there and their talent do the same kinds of shenanigans that they would in a morning show or an afternoon show or a night show?
So we have begun to talk to shows. Sorry, I know I'm going over my a lot
No,
of
yeah, you're
time here,
good.
but we've what so many stations do is they take their show and they repurpose it, and they just slap it up. Oh, let's just take look. And if your show is Wait, Don't Tell Me, you can take that and put it out as a podcast, and you don't really need to do anything to it. That works, right? But if you're a morning show that says the call letters 12 times an hour and plays 8 songs an hour, you can't just strip out the music and post it as a podcast and
Right.
think that it's going to work. So what we've been talking to stations and shows about is rethinking the show from the ground up and thinking about it may be primarily a radio show, maybe radio first, but we also know that it's going to go to all these other destinations. So let's figure out what all the other destinations are. Whether that's Instagram, whether that's YouTube Live or Twitch or, a podcast in Apple Podcasts or Spotify or wherever, and go, what works for each of those destinations? What do we have to do to each of the pieces of this show? And you're probably not going to take the entire show and put it all of those places, but maybe you've got a phone scam or a second date update or bit that you do that's a benchmark feature that you go, oh, that's going to work really well if we capture it on video and post it to Instagram, but it's got to be less than 60 seconds or whatever, and figure out, okay, knowing all the different places that we go, what are we going to put where? Not everything needs to go everywhere. How are we going to cut this up? How do we have to retool it a little bit on the air to make sure that it's also going to work in these other destinations, and really making it a multimedia show? And you got to have a real plan for that.
Sure. Sure.
Sometimes you got to tweak the on-air content too. The example that I give when we see this is cable news. So it used to be if you were watching cable news, you were watching it on a television, right?
Right.
Well, I'm a cord cutter. I don't have cable, right? But I can pull up CNN through Alexa on my smart speaker in my kitchen, which is what I usually do. Paul listens to cable news channels on his car radio, right? He can get it there.
Sure.
And so he'll often listen to news. And so what you started to notice is that some of the news networks realize that not everybody who is consuming their content has the picture with it. Some of them are just listening to the audio. And so you'll hear small tweaks where they'll put up a graph on screen and they'll just describe what's on the graph in addition to the image, to make sure that it works for people who are consuming it in a different way. Or, let's show these photos of, and they'll describe what's in the photos. Or sometimes they'll even explicitly say, for people who can't see this, here's what we're looking at.
Sure.
And I think that, that is part of recognizing that your content can be consumed in different ways at different destinations, and you've got to make it work for all those different destinations.
Oh, wow. To be starting out in radio now, I mean, with all of that possibility out there, I mean, yeah, it's a little bit more work than what we were doing, back in the day. We had 2 hours of show prep, and then we go on there and do our show and then go home for the day. But now if you're thinking about all those other little channels and how it's really, it just opens up the possibility of more promotion of your show and of your radio station.
Voice tracking gets a bad rap in our industry, and you'll hear people say everything should be, live and local and things. And I do believe in local. There are times when it needs to be live, but voice tracking can be a great tool because it can free really creative people up to create even more.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Now the hope is that that's what you're using voice track to do, and not saying, okay, you got a voice track so that you can, mop the bathroom or whatever other thing there is to do. But yeah, I think it can free you up. If I can knock out a show in half an hour, that's great, because now I can go spend that time creating other content. Me sitting through, Champagne Supernova by Oasis for 7 minutes was not a good use of my time. And now I don't have to sit there and do that anymore. I can be doing other more creative stuff. And I think it's great.
Yeah. Well, like I said, we could talk for hours and hours and hours. Seth, give folks information where they can reach out to you.
Sure. So jacobsmedia.com is the website, and I've got a blog on there. Every week I just write about digital tips and different ways to apply it. And sometimes it's social media, and sometimes it's podcasting, and sometimes it's websites and all sorts of different stuff. And you can subscribe to the blog as well and get those writings in your email inbox every week.
Absolutely. Seth, thank you so much. And look, I want to have you back on because we didn't even mention your podcast parties thing.
Oh, yes. We should talk about that. They're fun.
Yeah.
We do that.
All right. We'll do that. We'll do that next time. Like I said, we could talk for hours and hours and hours. Seth, thank you so much for being on the podcast today, and we'll look forward to talking with you soon.
Great. Thank you.
So awesome having Seth on the podcast today. We'd love to help you out with your website. Reach out to us at skyrocketradio.com. Have an awesome week online making your radio website better. We'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening to Better Radio Websites. Inspired by today's episode? Be sure you are subscribed and share this episode with a friend. Visit skyrocketradio.com/podcasts for more episodes as well as show notes for this episode. Need help starting or making your station website better? Visit skyrocketradio.com.